Less than 3 months after Governor Greg Abbott signed Senate Bill 10 into law, thousands of posters showing the Ten Commandments are hanging in Texas schools. This week on Inside the Investigation, senior investigative producer David Barrera and I explain the coordinated effort from national religious groups to get the displays in every classroom in the state. Welcome to Inside the Investigation. Right now, we're inside the Investigates office, and I'm joined by my colleague, senior investigative producer David Barrera. Thanks for joining us, David.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so today we're talking about a story that we worked on about Senate Bill 10. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's a law that passed in Texas this regular session, our last regular session, that requires school districts to post displays of the Ten Commandments that have been donated to them. And I think we've had our political team working on this when it was coming through the legislature, but our team jumped in kind of on the back end on September 1 when the law took effect, because we wanted to know how this was shaping up at school districts.
Right, yeah. Well, it's somewhat of a controversial law, and it generated a lot of public interest, and people were emailing us about it. So we wanted to get an idea of what was going on. And so just a little bit of a back story, a little information, like a school district essentially has to put up the poster the way the law is written if it's donated, fits the criteria for the way the poster is supposed to be printed and such with the lettering. And so we wanted to get an idea of which school districts were putting these up and where they were coming from. So the way we did that was to submit a lot of record requests.
A lot.
We submitted record requests to all of the school districts in our region,
right,
and then more to some of the largest school districts in the state. And what we found was that there were a variety of different levels, you would say, of people and organizations that were donating them. There were some national organizations that are formed that are really pushing this. Mm-hmm. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there were just individual people in parts of Texas that just thought they wanted to get involved and donated a handful of them. So that we were seeing a wide variety of stuff going on.
Definitely a wide variety. The first school district that we covered was Hayes, Consolidated Independent School District, because they sent out an email to their parents, so kind of a long explanation of how they arrived at putting them up, where they got the donations from. And I remember we were all sitting in here and we called them, and we learned that in one donation from an organization, they had enough posters for every single classroom. And that was really when we realized, okay, we need to send these records requests out, because who knows if this one organization is donating to all of the school districts in our state, in our area. And the organization that donated to Hayes, at first, we pulled the donation form, but at first in the letter, the school district said it was someone who said they were donating on behalf of My Faith Votes. That was the organization. But then we pulled the actual donation form, and it was the same person, but the person was donating under Million Voices. And talk more about this, but I think part of what we learned is that a lot of these organizations that we found were donating at different school districts, making large donations, enough to go in every classroom, they were kind of working together or affiliated with one another.
Yeah, so to look into the larger organizations, we looked at campaign finance information from the Texas Ethics Commission. We also looked at IRS 990 forms. That's for nonprofits have to file those for tax purposes. And we also looked at Secretary of State records, where businesses submit their filings each year, and where they incorporate their businesses in Texas. And so through those records, we got a good idea of how all these organizations are connected. One organization called Vision America Mobilized, which we found in Texas, started in 1998. A lot of these organizations sort of affiliated with them and affiliated with each other. The one you mentioned, named Million Voices, was organized in 2020 as a business that was doing Vision America Mobilized was doing business as Million Voices. You mentioned My Faith Votes. Okay. Yeah. And then there was also Restore American Schools. Mm-hmm. And so Restore American Schools is a big one that's really at the forefront of this, and on their website they have a...
like a ticker. It's like a counting down. Yeah.
Yeah, a ticker. And it said, when I looked at how many, I'm going to read this off here because I didn't remember the numbers, but in September, they sent posters to over 4,500 schools. They estimated that had an impact on 160,000 classrooms and millions of students. That organization is related to Million Voices. So there's a lot of crossover, like there's different names of organizations, but it seems to be a lot of the same people that are united to like kind of do this effort to get these posters into classrooms.
Right. And I mean, there's another organization, Citizens Defending Freedom. We actually got to talk to one of the people working for Citizens Defending Freedom as a part of our reporting, but they donated, I think it was enough posters for every single classroom in Georgetown ISD. And they've donated to lots of school districts across Texas. And they even said, the person, the CEO that we spoke to on the phone said that they work with Million Voices to do that. And we kind of followed up and said, in what way, how are you working together? And a lot of times, Citizens Defending Freedom isn't like affiliated with Million Voices, but they said Million Voices had already kind of built out the infrastructure to print the posters fast. And so here you have Citizens Defending Freedom, who's collecting their own donations and funds and then giving it to Million Voices to get the posters. So there's a lot of ways that they're working together. But you mentioned earlier how when we were pulling the donations, and we had to follow up and get updated information from the school districts because this was happening so fast. We would email one week and they hadn't gotten donations yet, and the next week we would email and they had, received enough for their entire school district. So it was happening quickly. But to kind of talk about what we were seeing in Round Rock ISD, which was the school district that we kind of profiled for this story, they had a group of moms donate enough posters for an entire campus. It was Cedar Ridge High School. And then they had separately a teacher who donated a small amount of Ten Commandment posters to their own campus. And so that just kind of shows you a small look into what's going on. All across, we were seeing a local pastor donated enough posters for 2 campuses, and I think it was Liberty Hill ISD. And also, we saw school districts, or at least one school district, that bought posters for their own school district. And to be clear, the law doesn't require school districts to use their own funds to buy Ten Commandment posters, but Frisco ISD, their spokesperson told us that they spent $1,800 of district funds to buy more than 4,000 posters for their own campus. There was a state lawmaker who helped author Senate Bill 10, who spoke with his team spoke with us and let us know that they were kind of on a mission to put Ten Commandment posters in his district, like in his area where he covers. And he had worked with Citizens Defending Freedom and other community members to raise the money and deliver the posters to several school districts in Texas's Coastal Bend. So there's a wide variety, but to your point, the large donations that we're seeing are from these national evangelical organizations who many of them will say as their mission statement that they want to see faith in the schools, they want to see the Ten Commandments, they want to see faith be explored publicly and in our public schools.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting Citizens Defending Freedom is based in Florida, and Restore American Schools, if I'm saying the name right, is doing similar work in Arkansas. So it's a national effort.
Absolutely. I do want to talk briefly about because we've kind of covered how the donations are flowing into schools, but we found in many cases it doesn't mean the posters are up. So Hayes CISD, which we mentioned earlier, they were the first that we covered. they did put the posters up. It was part of the letter that they sent to parents explaining that. And part of their explanation was that they were going to use their district funds to put it next to the Bill of Rights in every classroom. And sure enough, we went and visited, and in every classroom that we went into, there was a poster of the Ten Commandments, which the law says not only has to be certain dimensions, but it can't be hidden. It can't be behind the door. It can't be behind the coat rack. It has to be clear. I think the law says something funny like, to somebody with average vision has to be able to
see it across the room.
To see it across the room, yeah. And so they had that up next to the Bill of Rights that was the same size, and then a little placard explaining to students that this was up because of the law. In Georgetown ISD, we mentioned that Citizens Defending Freedom gave them enough posters for every classroom, but they're now in party to a lawsuit that the ACLU, a lawsuit from the ACLU and several families, trying to keep them from putting them up, and they haven't put them up so far, according to the spokesperson. Also, Round Rock ISD, we talked about these 2 donations that they got, but they kind of were in a back and forth with the donors who we spoke to, because you've got, on the one hand, the Texas Attorney General saying, if you're not involved in a lawsuit currently, there are 2 that are trying to prohibit the posters from going up, then you as the district needs to put the posters up if you get the donations. But we also learned through our reporting that the ACLU sent letters to every single school district in Texas saying, if you put these up, you are inviting litigation. And so in Round Rock ISD's case, they told us that they don't want to bring on any litigation, and they're just choosing to hold off on putting them up until this kind of progresses further in the courts.
Yeah, so there is sort of a discrepancy, maybe is not the right word, but there's differences between how the different districts are handling the litigation and then putting them up or not putting them up. And so it's still a young law. It's just was passed. And so they're still sort of sorting out how to move forward without breaking the law and just, honoring what the law says they have to do.
Right. And I want to ask what your takeaways are from all of this. What was your biggest takeaway from doing this reporting?
I think the big thing was that when we started looking into where the posters were coming from, that it was these big national organizations with I call them organizations. They have a lot of organization within themselves. They have very clear plan. They've developed their process for making these posters affordable for people. They're accepting donations. And they're really, spearheading this effort to get the posters into classrooms pretty effectively. They're, getting them into thousands and thousands of classrooms in Texas. So there are people, from down the street of a school that are like, I want to, give some posters, and they're giving a few, and there are posters coming in that way. But the main way that the posters are going into classrooms, it appears from our record requests, is these larger organizations that are taking donations and donating thousands of them to districts across the state.
They were ready. There was infrastructure there before the law passed and became law.
Seems like it, yeah.
It definitely seems that way to me. And my biggest takeaway, because I mentioned that we profiled Round Rock ISD, and you guys should watch the story to kind of hear their perspective. But we talked to 3 women who donated to Round Rock ISD, this particular school, Cedar Ridge. And we talked to the senior pastor at Hope Presbyterian in Austin. And so the 3 ladies, they obviously want the posters in the schools, and they kind of, their perspective, because I really was trying to figure out why do you want them there? And their perspective that they told me was that it's a historical document. And I think at one point during the interview, they said to them, it's a religious text, but to others, it could be it's just a book. It's a historical document. And their thought process that they articulated to me is that it helped we can find these themes from the Ten Commandments in our government, in our laws. But in talking to the senior pastor at Hope Presbyterian, I thought his perspective was really interesting, because he told me in the interview that his faith tradition values the Ten Commandments, but he had his one concern that he had was that, you know, he wouldn't try to teach chemistry, and he wouldn't really expect every public school teacher to be able to give context that he would be able to provide, and that other faith communities would be able to provide to the Ten Commandments, that it being on the wall is not enough context, that faith leaders can help people put it into context and to understand it better, and that it's just not the proper venue for it without that context. And then his other point that he made was that that what's the message that it sends, right, to people who don't have a faith tradition, people who are agnostic, people who are Muslim, people who are Jewish. What is the message that it sends to have one religion represented on the wall and not the others? And so it was really interesting to hear their perspective, and I would encourage you guys to listen to how they articulate it themselves. But David, thank you so much for coming on to Inside the Investigation. I always value having you as a reporting partner, and this was an interesting one that we got to work on this time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. You can watch Inside the Investigation on our KXAN Plus app. You can also find it online at kxan.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.